Welcome everybody and thanks for joining my session. So today's talk will be about the difficulties of introducing architecture decision record into an organization. And the title, How Not to Get Lost in the Past, is kind of refurbished because I've used the same title when I've talked about ADRs in general, but later I figured out that this title can be used here as well because in this case it is not the decision and the context around it which is being lost in the past, but our attempt to introduce it in the company. But let's see what we will cover through this presentation. So first of all, we will talk about what is an ADR. Hands in the air, who knows what is an ADR? Okay, I can see quite some people. For the rest of you, as you can see, we will cover the basics. And later, we'll see how does it look like in practice. So how do these documents are being born and end up in some sort of log. And then I'm going to talk about our obstacles during the introduction. And obviously, how we overcome them. And obviously, at the end, I hope we will have some awesome questions about the topic. And what we won't talk about. We won't talk about why having ADRs are a good thing, because let me give you a hint, it's not just a searchable UI where you can check the previous decisions. And also, we won't talk about good practices of creation of ADRs, required sections, how it should be formatted, how a good ADR looks like. And similarly, we won't talk about anti-patterns. For example, when you create an ADR, but it's more like a sales pitch, pushing the reader towards a direction. These are well documented and there are some great blog posts about them. And I will link those at the end of the talk. And most importantly, there won't be a single process to take away. Through this presentation, I will talk about our problems mostly. But different companies have different problems and different solutions. But let's have a word about me. My name is KRISZTIAN Papp. I'm from Hungary. I work as a principal software engineer at Diligent, where I'm responsible for migrating a diverse set of products to the cloud. I love NeoVim, and if you do as well, you might recognize the style of this presentation. I also consider myself as an enemy of the mutable state. That's how I survived Java 7. And I'm also a founder and a co-host of a podcast and a developer community in Hungary. But enough about me, let's move on to our topic. So before jumping into what is an ADR, hands in the air, who used ADRs in the workplace? And who made an attempt to introduce it? And who failed? I can see one hand rising. Let's hope this talk gonna help you next time. So ADR stands for Architecture Decision Record, but what is considered an architecture decision, the AD part? So based on the relevant GitHub page, an architecture decision is a justified software design choice that blah, 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 blah. We all know that. So there is a debate about what is considered architecturally significant, but for today's talk, we are going to assume that those that are difficult to change. Let's see some example decisions which can be considered architecturally significant. Let's say we are about to use event-driven architecture. It's a totally different than request-response way of working, so it's hard to change. Let's choose a cloud provider. Once you are there, you are kind of vendor locked, so it's hard to change. Let's start decomposing to microservices. It sounds exciting, but it requires a lot of effort and moves a bunch of complexity to the infrastructure. Let's replace MariaDB with whatever NoSQL database. Some might argue, but even with a well-layered architecture, it can be painful, especially migrating all the existing data. Let's say merging to a monorepo. Good luck migrating commits, rethinking processes, Git flow, and pipelines. Using peer-to-peer instead of client-server. Let's hope you don't have to make this decision in the near future. And how about creating a data warehouse? But how? So an architecture decision record is an entry in a log which captures a single decision like these with the relevant context, decision drivers, considered options, and so on. When we talk about ADR, we refer to a single entry. And when we talk about ADRs, usually we talk about the whole history of the records, which can be called as an architecture decision log as well. But let's see how an ADR might look like. So first we have some title that we are about to use Redis as a persistent storage. It is followed by some context to help us understanding this ADR. And then we see the decision that we're going to use a Redis cluster to store everything. And it's decided, so no way to go back. Let's see some of the consequences of this decision. It's a good thing because we don't need a caching layer anymore. It's built in. And the bad thing, yeah, we might need to provision a huge cluster to fit everything in memory. But that's on operations team, and they like challenges anyways. There are plenty of formats out there, and this one is kind of basic because it's missing other options, decision drivers, and so on. But as an example, it should be enough. And this one is also Markdown based. That's a common scenario because developers already know Markdown, and any other document type can work. And what we can note here that none of the details about how we plan to do this is documented here. And that's on purpose because an ADR should be brief. And if someone needs more context, we can always add a link in the ADR. Okay, but how does it look like in practice? How do these documents are being born and end up in that log? Well, it depends on several factors, organizational hierarchy, the team, and so on. So therefore, we won't have a single process which fits every situation. But let's see some generic process which can help us to get a grasp on what it looks like. So the whole process starts with an architecture decision up ahead. We have different options with pros and cons, and we want to document the decision making along with the final decision somewhere. And some of the options might be better fit for our needs, and some maybe not. And we have to carefully investigate each and every one of them to figure out what will be the best. And so we have the decision. We need to store it somewhere. And at Diligent, we are storing the ADRs in Git, but the organization's wiki can be used for that purpose. But if you cast your vote on Git like we do, there are a number of different tools which can be used to organize these logs. And one of them is Log4Brains. Surprise, that's the same we are also using. And it's Markdown based, renders to HTML, and it has a nice GitHub integration, so you can have your architecture knowledge base up in no time. So we want to document our decision, but first, we need to check the existing ADRs to see if there were similar decisions in the past. But let's imagine that we couldn't find anything. So we create a PR, use this tool to, based on a template, create a Markdown file, an ADR, and we open that PR. So we made that decision, documented the context, other options, linking any research. And then it comes to the review. Once the ADR is created, it will be reviewed. And it can be async with review comments, or it can be a recurring meeting or ad hoc meeting, or maybe the hybrid of both worlds. And we use a hybrid approach. The format checks are being done on the PR with review comments, and then it gets merged, and since we have a nice GitHub Pages integration, few minutes later, it is visible. And then during our recurring meeting, we can go over these proposed ones and vote on them if they can be accepted, rejected, or might need some rework. And once this voting is done, the PR gets updated, and the ADR is now finalized. Let's recap. So we have the idea, which requires some decision. Then we check if there is already an ADR about similar topic. We open a PR with the proposed state. Format checks happen on the PR. We have the formal review. And then the ADR is finalized. It's in an immutable state. And it seems pretty straightforward, right? It's just a few simple steps. Okay, but then why do I have this talk? Because we are planning to introduce something to an organization. And do you know what's easy to introduce in an organization? Recharge weeks, unplug days, and 4-day weeks. Just kidding, that's already requires a bunch of coordination. And when I talk with our developers, usually what I hear that, yeah, ADRs are so good. But when it comes to participating in the process, then they aren't that eager to do so. And that's the root cause of all the problems. Let's see some of the obstacles we faced, and later on we will unfold them one by one. So first of all, you need to fight the managers to allocate some time to do this work. And teams are usually overloaded, and there is not much room there. And also you need to fight the developers who are struggling with the process, sometimes feeling it's kind of blocking them. You also need to fight the developers who hate documenting things. And trust me, there are a lot of them. And they might be a minority, but people who love writing docs can be a problem. And you also need support from the top to kickstart things. And at the same time, you need support from the bottom to keep it going. And last but not least, every organization is different. So if you would if you would expect a magic recipe for ADRs, then I have some bad news for you. Let's see those overloaded teams. So writing an ADR might feel like a burden. Our engineers accepted the job to create the next abstract annotation, config, dispatcher, servlet, initializer, or whatever, not to write these silly things. Not to mention reviewing them. It's kind of similar to code reviews, but without code. And who likes doing that? And sometimes they will just say, who cares? I don't want to be involved in these decisions. I just want to be close to the code itself. Anyways, you are the architect. Why don't you do it? It's way above my pay grade. And usually, these are the people who will blame that architect when a decision is being made over the top of their heads. So how can we solve this one? Have you heard about the McDonald's theory? John Bell came up with this term. It's about deciding where to have lunch with his coworkers, and he recommends McDonald's. And his coworkers immediately say no, and out of thin air, better alternatives emerge. Why can't we use a similar thing to tickle our team's brain? So instead of McDonald's, let's use Kafka. Let's imagine a scenario when someone approaches us that, hey, you should figure out which database to use in our content service. And I will say, okay, let's use Kafka. Hey, you must be joking, right? If you have a better idea, then why don't you come up with an ADR? And obviously, we don't want to fend off all the responsibilities from ourselves, especially if we are responsible for the architecture. But if we deliberately recommend something silly, which could have awful consequences, they must join the game. We can even spend some time documenting these silly decisions somewhere. Just make sure that we have a good poker face to do it. And also don't forget to tell your manager about your plans or you might get into trouble. And unfortunately, especially at the early phase of the introduction, the whole process might seem like a bottleneck or a burden, even though we are trying to empower the people to make decisions. Actually, they are stuck. Let's say we try to enforce people to join that process, to get some traction. And in this case, we might see ADRs about stuff which can be toggled with an environment variable anytime, which shouldn't end up in this forum. Hey, you wanted ADRs? Here are your ADRs. On the other spectrum, if the created ADRs aren't reviewed by others in time, then people might question the usefulness of the whole process and might move the bar of what's considered architecturally significant higher and higher, and then move on with their work. And this is especially true with tight deadlines, when we just don't have time for this. And also, who is responsible for reviewing the ADRs? What about the ones which aren't reviewed merge? Does those still valid? What about the ADRs which require some input from security or legal? And it is definitely something which blocks the adoption, and so we need to figure out something about it. Managers love processes. So how about we create around the ADRs one, which aligns with our existing one, or we incorporate the creation of ADRs. So let's say we already have some kind of process for every major feature or change. For those, we create some discovery document to gather all the details. There is even a template for that. And how about we extend that document with an ADR link? By default, every change requires one, but we can opt out if our architect signs off on that. But this is just the first step. If we have example ADRs, good and bad as well, then we can rule out the ones which shouldn't end up in this forum. This is like our coding convention for ADRs. And during the reviews, we can always refer to those, quickly shutting down debates on the format and drastically speeding up the review process of the ADRs. And let's start with some low-hanging fruit, like retrospective ADRs. And these are the ones which you document after the decision is being made. ADRs and unit tests have a lot in common. Both are better done first. But, as with unit tests, a retrospective ADR is still better than no ADR at all. Not to mention that this way we aren't blocking the development until the team gets some practice on how to create them. To speed up the reviews, we should assign dedicated reviewers and keep rotating them. We can even fast-track some of the ADRs if that's urgent. And for the ADRs which left unattended in the repo, we can have some automation to close them if they are stale. And one example for this is when we had an AD about a certain customer requirement for one of the potential customers. But at the end, the deal has failed, the ADR was closed. And we should involve stakeholders early to avoid waiting on their input, especially legal and security folks, because they tend to be slow on deciding things. But let's see what we can do about the next topic. So most of our engineers hate writing documentation, and I'm not judging them, because there might be a couple of reasons to end up like this. And if we focus on the ADRs, then impostor syndrome might be a reason. They might also fear presenting these in front of large crowds, scared that their ADRs won't be perfect at first. And even though documentation is usually part of the definition of done, people still feel like it's the last 20% of the task, which takes up the second 80%. So can't we just skip it? And the same applies to ADRs. Hey, we already made our decision. Why can't we just start implementing it? Not to mention that usually documenting something is just the first step. The real challenge lies in keeping them relevant and accurate over time. So even if they were enthusiastic at the beginning, that's long gone because they've seen the fate of these wiki pages. So how can we expect someone to spend time on something which becomes outdated and no one will keep it in a good shape? What can we do about this? So to further help with this impostor syndrome, we can review their ADRs privately or even pair up with them by creating the new ones. About maintaining documentation, luckily, ADRs are immutable, and apart from being superseded by a new ADR, they are not going to change. Also, they are short, so we aren't expecting dozens of pages. And we should convince them that the ADR is more like a platform of continuous learning by providing insights into various architectural patterns, trade-offs, and best practices, enabling them to expand their knowledge. On the other end, there are people who really love writing documentation. They aren't necessarily good at it, but the sheer amount of words produced by them suggests that they love doing it. If they happen to create an ADR, then a single ADR will be 20 pages long, and if you aren't lucky enough, you should review it. And these people are usually good at English, and reading an ADR might feel like an essay. Definitely a pleasant read, but a long one. But unfortunately, the lengthier the ADR, the more time consuming it to review, both synchronous or asynchronous. And sometimes they will just copy and paste existing wiki pages and try to ship them as an ADR. I've seen 3 similar ADRs from the same person. Each of them were 4 pages long or something. But there are far worse examples out there. So for example, the .NET Reactive repository contains some ADR as well. This one was brought to my attention by one of my colleagues, and it even states in the brief section that this is an extremely long document. So guess how long this ADR is, and remember, it is written in Markdown, so usually all these long lines are a single line. It's more than 1,000 lines. Remember our example earlier? That was about 10 lines. So let's see what we can do to avoid these. And how about we either contain or direct their creativity? And time is money, so we should keep ADRs brief to spare effort on both reviewing and writing it. And it should be more like an executive summary of the decision making. But if someone is interested in depth of the problem, I mean, for example, wants to check the performance test or whatever can be found about that decision, the option is there because we can have links pointing to that 20-page document in our wiki. And to enforce this, we can even time box these. If you can't present your case in X minutes, it means you need to rework it. We can even implement some sort of rule for the ADRs that if it's longer than X lines, we reject it on site. We can also point them to example ADRs to get a sense of how detailed it should be. But this is still about containing their creativity. How about we direct them somewhere? If you read an ADR and it feels it was written in a hurry because it's full of typos, grammar errors, that's not a good omen. So why don't we assign them to review other ADRs to keep them involved? They can help others by rephrasing them, fix typos early on, hitting 2 birds with 1 stone. And I have some homework for you. Let's search your company wiki for the term ADR or architecture decision record and count the results. This way you can see how many of them failed before. And this is important because you don't want to end up like them. And as with most initiatives, you will need sponsors to start introducing something to the company. Without that, it can lose traction easily, and you end up as the next item in that search result. And you will need buy-in, because again, time is money, and you need a pretty good case against the engineering managers who will try to focus all the efforts on shipping things. Why is it good? Why should we spend our precious time on writing and reviewing something? Be prepared with an answer. Also, who should be involved in the process? Everyone? A single team? Seniors or staff engineers only? The more senior engineers you expect, the more they will fight against it. But ultimately, people decide on how they spend their time. And if you can't convince them, or their KPIs does not align with what ADRs can offer, they might just ignore it. Let's say if I finish this epic and fix that bug, I will get my bonus in this quarter. Why should I spend my time on this cross-team knowledge sharing? What can we do about these? So my advice is to start small, in a single team, and based on shadow IT, let's call it shadow ADRs. And you should focus on the pain points, finding them. Let's say the team keeps complaining on missing justification for certain technical decisions. Awesome. People feel missing out of the decision making. Cool. Why am I saying that? Because all these can be cured with ADRs. This will be your golden ticket against those managers we talked about in the previous slide. And at first, you want to involve just a few selected people. Start with retrospective ADRs and then move on with the whole decision-making process. You can showcase it to others once it started rolling. And this way, it is easier to get approval from the managers. They will be amazed that you convinced developers to document things in a structured way So you will get the green light to officially involve the team. And while it is small, you can figure out how to fit the process into the organization. When you start extending it to others, then it won't feel like that they are like guinea pigs in an experiment. Once it is rolling in a single team, you need to extend it to others. But how do we go big? I mean, convincing a single team is challenging, but multiple ones? Let's say you announce the team's important decisions with the usage of ADR during a town hall or whatever forum. And people will start to ask questions about how to get their ideas out there. What is this tool? Where is the process documented? Luckily, you already made some progress on that front, so a unified process can be used. And once it is getting traction, you can start using ADRs as kind of a central forum. And if you already know about some previous technical decisions which should be changed, then you can also announce these changes using ADRs. And once you reach this point, you can start extending to other teams in the organization. But during extending the idea to other teams, you might run into other issues. Organization structure can be an obstacle as well. Maybe not exactly the structure itself, but rather how Conway's law will take an effect. So what happens when your company has a bunch of different products from previous acquisitions, planned by different teams, serving various personas? How to extend your process to them as well? How these gonna align with the company's architectural vision? To further complicate things, these products can run on different stack. One might be Go with React, others will be full stack JavaScript, Angular, .NET, whatever. And from an average engineer standpoint, it kind of further increases the distance between them and the others. And if the teams are considered autonomous, then why should they care about completely different products ADRs? Why do others care about what they do around here? And even if those products are integrated somehow, they only care about the contract between them. Who cares if the others are replacing their database, and especially why? So there is a us and them mindset. And this will certainly introduce some knowledge silos in the teams. And you don't even need different products to face an issue in the world of microservices. One of the selling points of this architectural style is to decentralize the decision making and providing higher ownership to the teams. And now they have to discuss their architectural decisions with others. What do we expect? What will be their reaction? And it's going to be something like this. But again, what can we do about this? How can we convince those teams that they are not faraway islands, but part of a bigger picture, that they share more than they think? We should understand that usually there are some common problems. It can be the infrastructure, how we deploy things, how we test or how we manage our third-party libraries. These decisions happen on an architectural level, and that's why it is called architecture decision. Let's say a containerized application is written in Go or Scala or JavaScript. What difference it's gonna make on an architectural level? Usually, it's gonna be a similar box in a diagram. It will communicate through the same set of methods as the others, with some rare exceptions. It will consume CPU and memory, same as the others. It will manage its dependencies with some package manager, same as the others. Uses I/O and so on. Why should they feel special? I help you. They are not. But it's not enough. You need proof. What if during these meetings they learn some new concept? They learn about how we decide on things, some typical decision drivers, trade-offs, not to mention architectural patterns. There are a lot of information which they can benefit from, and it can be considered as some sort of learning material. And I don't know about you all, but I really love reading about tech. And usually I need to visit some external blog for that. Like when I read about Amazon Prime moving back from step functions and Lambda to EC2 and ECS. What if you can learn things like that within your organization? What if your knowledge hub isn't just a set of ADRs, but some exciting read? And that is something you should work on. And remember those people who love writing documentation? You might want to involve them in this journey. But first, we need to find these people. Because you also need followers. Why? Because getting support from the management isn't enough. You need people who truly believe in ADRs. Otherwise, you will be the one who create most of the ADRs, and maybe the only one who will review them. And if you can have a dedicated review meeting, you will be the one facilitating it. But what happens if you go on vacation, get sick, leave, or maybe get fired? You need others to take on these roles, because the process must go on. Otherwise, it will be one of the many attempts to introduce it in the company. But how can we find the right people in the company? Let's start by hosting an internal meetup about that topic. Or it can be a brown bag session, lunch and learn, whatever is common in your company. And with this, you might find the people who are really interested. And with a bit of luck, they can even be the early adopters. And it can be a self-organizing group, regularly meeting, speaking about the issue, successes on their journey. And with them, you can spread the idea in different teams, hear out their problems as well. But in a summary, unfortunately, there is no silver bullet here. Every organization is different and the process should be tailored to it. Introducing it is not a technical challenge, but a management one. Especially at the early phase, you should make sure it is fun instead of focusing on doing it perfectly. You can even reward the ones who are participating in it, if you have the power to do that. Otherwise, you need sponsors, remember? And it's impossible to get the initial process right. So you need to hold some retrospectives, collect ideas, and iterate on the process. Introducing ADRs, sorry. You also need to make sure that you merge the earlier initiatives. Let's leverage their previous information, the previous attempts to document things. With this, you can further improve the amount of information which is available through your initiative. And introducing ADRs is not just having a searchable UI. It's the whole process. How you make decisions, how you spread the knowledge. So you need to document this somewhere and make sure more and more people are aware of this. Luckily, the whole concept of ADRs are trending nowadays. So it's easier to find additional resources about the topic. And there is the GitHub page, which I linked that short term, what is an AD. And Olaf Zimmermann made some very, very useful articles about how to create ADRs, how to review them, what's a definition of an ADR. Definitely worth checking this blog out. And I also added a link to the tool which we use for managing our ADRs as well. And I might be quite fast, but we ended up in the questions.
So it sounds like you put all your ADRs in a separate repo. Can you discuss why that's the choice over putting ADRs in with the code in different repos, like for each service or something like that?
I guess it was because I wanted a single place where we can see. So at Diligent, we are organized not just teams, but pillars as well. So we right now having all the ADRs for a single pillar grouped because there is an organization-wide initiative moving to the cloud. And there are a bunch of things. I mean, most of the decisions about that, how we move to the cloud, how we gonna be a single platform. And that's why I thought it's a good idea to have all these grouped together because if you search them, you should search in a single place.
Yep, that makes sense. Just wanted to find out.
Just wanted to find out, ADRs are just for new changes, or is it if we have got an app which got released in 2 years, just before 2 years, do we still can we still create an ADR just to keep a record of it, or is it? Do you think it is not useful to do that?
It depends. If you know the context about why that decision has been made, I mean, if you were around, then definitely. But if you don't know about, okay, there is a decision and why we decided upon that, then I don't think that's an ADR gonna solve that because it won't have the context, won't have the other options, so it's gonna be not the best.
Thank you.
So once your ADR has been approved and it's gone on to the immutable state, and for any reason, if your solution is getting changed or one of your critical decisions are getting reviewed and changed, how do you manage the life cycle of an approved ADRs?
There is a single change which can be done to an approved ADR. Is adding a link to the new one which basically overrides that. Because that new ADR which you create will contain different contexts, might have changed decision drivers and so on. So I remember I had an ADR about, let's say, using Elastic Kubernetes services with Fargate. But later on, it was a requirement that, yeah, the service should move to the Gov Cloud. And in AWS Gov Cloud, that's not possible. So that service is not available.
Can I revisit the question? So do you approve the ADR onto the version of a document, or it's just a single document that you approve and you put it as an archive or kind of into a immutable state?
I mean, it's gonna be changed from approved to superseded. And it's gonna contain the link to the new one.
Okay, so if you are revisiting any decision onto the existing ADR, you are kind of creating a new document.
Yep. So that's why I said it's immutable, because at that point, that context was there. You shouldn't change that because you can change the past.
Okay, and what's your experience on the searchability of the ADR? Because historically, if your company is like quite a fast pace, and within 2 years you have lots of ADR could have been produced, how you are revisiting and finding something that has been previously decisioned, and how intuitive was to put it into the GitHub from the searchability perspective versus Confluence or any other document that is more searchable onto the keywords?
I don't like the search functionality of the Confluence because that's why I showed that picture. It's actually a real search result because you might get what you want or you might not get what you want because there might be a bunch of teams creating, fiddling around with it, creating Confluence page with the title of ADR. So there might be a bunch of decisions coming up. I mean, bunch of pages coming up in that search results, which are not necessarily good for you. So that's why I use this Log4Brains, because we are putting it in a single place. It has a web page which a search functionality as well. So if we want to search for something, we can go over there and it should be there. If it's not there, then we don't have an ADR about it.
Okay.
And especially if the company is, large and there are different pillars or different organization units, you might find a completely different initiative, completely different thing, and that's not useful for you because that's in a different organization unit. You don't care about. I mean, yeah, it can contain some information which can be useful for you because there is a slight chance that they walk in a similar shoes, but it's highly unlikely.
Okay. Can I ask one more?
Yep.
Historically, have you ever able to make a decision, or was you able to influence or any of your ADR architects was able to influence a decision onto the historical ADRs? Because, okay, we have a ADR that was decisioned onto that criteria, pros and cons, and now you are trying to drift away onto this. So was it historically of any of your approved ADR was having any influence onto the incoming or new ADRs?
Yeah, that's why you need to search before creating a new ADR. That's why you need to search about, okay, has someone tried this before? Because let's say there is an app, I want to replace the, I don't know, HTTP with WebSockets or something. But I want to figure out, because there is a chance that someone already done that, or someone already done a POC about it, but they figured out, yeah, it's not gonna work out. So I can spare a bunch of effort even with the POCs. Is that answer for? Okay. There is a.
Thanks for the talk. If you have upfront design and design review for a system, would you still create ADRs kind of after the fact, or what kind of role does ADRs play there?
I guess, as I said during the talk, having a retrospective ADR is still better than having no ADR at all. If you can record the context around the decision, then I still recommend creating one. Oh. I don't know who was.
Hi, I was thinking this talk has been a lot about you have decided to use ADRs. How do you introduce this? But for those of us where ADRs are new, it seems like the scope of it is very broad, because you talked about architecture, but some of the points was also like infrastructure. So what would you say generally you should keep the focus on when you are creating ADRs?
Okay, let me try to answer the question. So an ADR can be about everything which you consider hard to change. It can even be, I don't know, how you, a Git flow or whatever. It can be also captured in an ADR. Because once you started using it, it's kind of hard to change, because you need to change processes and so on. So it's not just code or architecture or infrastructure.
Then, as a following up question, like some of that I would like today do it as Confluence pages, where you have pages with an article about here's how this works, and this is why we did those things, and compare that to an ADR which is compact. Like, what would you say the argument is for making the switch from from a Confluence focused documentation or to an ADR focused one?
Well, I would kind of create some sort of summary based on those Confluence pages, because, as I also mentioned, ADR should be brief. If it's, let's. Okay.
Not so much how, but why. Like, for a person who doesn't know ADRs, what would your argument be for them to say, instead of using Confluence documentation, go over to ADRs, and here's why.
Okay. So let's get back to code. Let's imagine a function. Let's call it order or something. And based on looking at that function, you know that, yeah, it's about ordering something. It's about placing an order or something. But once you click on that and you see the implementation, you will see a bunch of details which you might not care about. You only care about, yeah, at this point, we are placing an order. And an ADR is like something like that. If it's a summary, it's an easy to read document. So you don't need to fiddle around, search through that long document to see, okay, what was the reason we decided on that. It has the opportunity to place a link in it, which points to that long summary, if you are interested. But if you are only interested in, okay, what was the decision and why, in kind of short, that's ADRs are for. And that's what I feel, that these long documents are not suitable, because you need to read through, search through, and it might take a while once you find the answer, hiding between a bunch of implementation details, performance metrics, whatever.
So you mentioned multiple times that we have to keep it brief and short. How you keep brief and short an ADR review if you fill it up with a lot of Confluence page links? So how you decide on if that Confluence page with like tens or hundreds of pages can really support the statements in the ADR?
Awesome question. During the ADR review, usually we don't go through these documents, but we make sure that the ADR itself contains what's required to make that decision. That's part of the formal review. So by looking at the ADR, if you are confident that, yeah, based on this information, I would decide this way, or I would decide that way, that's a long enough one. But yeah, we add these Confluence pages for anyone who wants to dig deep on why exactly.
So
Or
you have
let's
to
say,
trust. So you have to trust the author of the ADR.
yeah, I mean, during this
That's-
formal review, you can search it and you can see the document, see that, yeah, I mean, you included in the ADR that we are using X, but actually in the documents, it's completely opposite. So there is a problem here, and that's why you need these formal PR checks.
Thank you.
Just wait for the mic, because
So in while doing so for any decisions you make, do we need to list all the choices that we have gone through, or we will just say we have considered other options and this is the best because of this? That's one first question, and then second question: have you got any sample ADRs that you can just show us if you have got time?
unfortunately, I'm kind of bound with an NDA, so that's why I couldn't show you one. But yeah, we are basically considered options are being listed in the ADRs. I mean, if there are tens or dozens of options, yeah, we usually group them, or might not include all of them, because those are completely unrelated or not relevant, and there is no chance that they would solve that problem, and we are not going to include them in the ADR.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. I guess then thank you for your attention, and